Hi, so the question is about going up the ladder. So the principal being the highest ladder in the school system, and if you're having issues with the principal or you're not getting where you want with the principal, when do you just switch schools, or when do you go to the school board and seek guidance or go up the ladder with the school board?
That's a really good question. So you're having problems communicating effectively with the principal, your issues aren't being addressed. When do you go to the school district and complain about the situation, and when do you just kind of cut your losses and switch schools? Well, I check out the other schools first and talk to parents about their experience with the principals. So, do you live in how many schools are available in your district? I mean, how big is the district and all those issues? Those are all considerations. I think that's where you're using your social judgment. I do say to families sometimes when I hear about the principal's behavior, and I say to them, have you considered switching schools? Because, effectively this principal is itless. How much is it going to take to change him to being someone who is at least it-like, right? And you can advocate within the school district. And often what will happen is that the school district administrator will sit down with the principal, because he is his supervisor or her supervisor, and say, how can we stop this parent from waiting in my reception area every Friday afternoon? Could we not address these issues? Let's think more creatively about them. Sometimes that works. So if you really like the school and the location, and principals do turn over every 4 or 5 years, and he's almost ready to leave or she's almost ready to leave, then you may want to hang on. You may want to, if you really like the area, etc. I always think it's worth going and speaking to the administrator, because if not just for you and your child, if he's also hearing or she's also hearing, this is the assistant superintendent and then the superintendent, if they're also hearing from other parents, because you don't know what other parents are saying in that school, you might have some idea, but you don't necessarily know what happened last year or the year before, that you're giving the school district an opportunity to address the issue. If you simply move your child, which is often quite difficult, it's not, you're not really advocating, you're kind of letting it go. And sometimes when I talk to parents, I say, it's pick your battles. But I would let the superintendent or the assistant superintendent know about my concerns anyway, because it's not, if you've got the ability to articulate those, that there's half a dozen parents who probably don't know quite what's going on. So that's always worth doing, and you'll feel better about it yourself too, because that's one of the issues. In your experience, is there a difference in the understanding of accommodation for principals towards challenging behaviors from from elementary to high school? In other words, I think what this means is, once a child goes into high school, is there a different attitude towards challenging behaviors? We often find that high schools, because they're larger, are less accommodating, less sensitive to kids with special needs. Partly because there's no classroom teacher and there's all these different classrooms they have to move between. It's more complicated. Often secondary schools will have specialized classrooms, resource rooms, where all kids with special needs are worked with together, which can be challenging for some students. So my quick answer to that is it depends on the school and the principal. So the same kind of advocacy rules apply. And if the child has challenging behaviors, it really is about, what's being done to address that. Is the school willing to work with outside consultants on addressing challenging behaviors, on being proactive? In other words, a child's challenging behaviors are not written in stone, right? It's not necessarily the case that because he has autism, he has challenging behaviors, and there's nothing we can do about that. It's not the case. And it really, if the school team isn't able to get those challenging behaviors under control, if they're not able to stabilize the situation, then often the family can ask for a consultant from the Provincial Outreach Program for Autism and Related Disorders to come in and do an assessment. The family could ask for the behavior specialist from the school team, from the school district to come in. Often, and this is a very human thing, is that people don't really want, they see it, and this applies to schools too, as kind of washing their dirty linen by getting outsiders in to do an assessment of the child and give some suggestions. That's of course not the case, but it is the case that children with autism are really different from each other, and sometimes a clean pair of eyes can be really helpful. So by that I mean someone who's not working with the child every day. And I also think this is really helpful for parents. So for those of you who did the positive behavior support workshop with Dr. Brenda Fawcett, and who is fantastic, she will show us what we are doing inadvertently as parents to reinforce those behaviors we're really desperate to get rid of, right? We don't know, for example, no one tells you when you have a diagnosis, you know what? The reason that your child has such challenging behaviors is because he or she has learned that when he screams, he gets what he wants or she wants. And we haven't taught them any other way of communicating. And plus, even if they've got words, you answer faster when they're screaming than when they use their words. This also applies, by the way, to typical children, right? But there are things that school teams, just like home teams, just like parents do inadvertently. And it's not about how terrible they are or whatever. It's just that they can't, once we're really in the house, once we're in a sort of pattern of behavior, when the child, you do this, the child does that, and he goes off to the separate room, or the parent gets called and the child goes home. What's in it for the school team to work through? If the child goes home every time they have a problem, what's in it for the school team to get some help in working out what the problem is and how to address it and how to support the child being successful? In terms of reinforcement, if the school team isn't being required to address these issues, there's a problem there. And I think this happens very often, and the parents often feel very guilty about their child's behavior. They feel responsible for it. Most parents, we feel it's an ingrained thing. If our child is behaving in a socially inappropriate manner, and my son could have written the textbook on socially inappropriate manner, we assume that it's our fault. We know, perhaps we know he has autism and it isn't our fault, but it's still very difficult. And we're very emotional about it, we're embarrassed. And in those circumstances, it's difficult for us to advocate, but often what we need to advocate for is, we're not seeing the same kind of behaviors at home. We find these types of supports are very helpful in his therapy at home in order for him to make progress. And if you remember, I talked about the Hugo decision. And the Hugo decision was around meaningful consultation. And part of if you look at the case, was that the school team wasn't able to have his behaviors under control, right? And so he was not learning. And everything was pretty miserable. What the Hugo decision said that meaningful consultation and also bringing in external experts to help in that really was a requirement in order to support the child. And so that's pretty radical, but a lot of school districts don't really understand that decision. A lot of families aren't aware that it exists. And so workshops like this are all about just trying to spread the word about, the basic thing, the number one message is that when a child has challenging behaviors at the age of 4 or 8 or 12 or 16, it doesn't mean that they're going to have them forever. And the reason they have challenging behaviors is that we haven't figured out how to help them. And it's our obligation as their parents, as their teachers, as their behavior consultants to figure it out. And if you have a behavior consultant working with your child and there's no improvement in that child's behaviors, and everything else you've kind of accounted for, then really you need to consider getting a new professional to work with your child. That professional may be very good for working with children of a different profile, but it's not working for you. And I especially think this is important when we're dealing with issues like, what I often see is that a parent will have engaged professionals and the program will have been going a year or two, and things are going very well in the basement. You know, the child knows all their colors, they recognize their letters, all their shapes. They're the only 3-year-old who knows what a hexagon is, you know. In fact, it's almost a diagnostic tool, you know. All 3-year-olds who knows what a hexagon is, those are the kids who've been receiving therapy for autism. That's not very functional or meaningful. What's really very important for the child learning from their environment is, can the parents take him or her to the grocery store? Is he toilet trained so that he can be meaningfully included in school and in the community, right? Is he eating a wide variety of foods? Or does he only eat, in the case of some children I've known, even as teenagers, white food, cauliflower, chicken, and white cheese, I think was it. So there's all kinds of things that we need to think about. So there's eating, there's sleeping. Is the child up every night screaming? No one's getting any sleep, and that is a form of torture under the UN. You know, sleep deprivation is a form of torture. Wonderful video that we have on AVA, Autism Videos at ACT, done by Dr. Beth Ann Mallow, and she is a neurologist specializing in sleep, internationally renowned, and then she had 2 kids with autism. So if you want to know about sleep, this is the presentation, and it's free. But if the professional that you're working with, you know, you watch one of ACT's videos and you can say, yeah, well, that really kind of makes sense, but I'm not sure how do I get it from that video to my child, right? Because he's not watching it with me, and if he is, he's not really interested. And that's where a good behavior consultant, you know, supported by a speech path or an OT, depending on what the issues are, should be able to help you with your child on those behaviors. Because when I talk about behaviors, I'm not just talking about challenging behaviors like screaming, biting, all those kinds of things. I'm talking about the behaviors that get in the way of everyday family life. And for me, I think as families, if you're going to help your child, if you're actually hostages in your own home, because you cannot go to the grocery store together, you can't go on a school, you know, you can't go on an outing, you know, you're getting on the bus is very difficult. Anything like that, or even, you know, he keeps taking his seatbelt off and tries to throw himself out of the back door. This is one of Adam's specialties. So one of the things that we need to think about as parents is, if we could get help dealing with those issues, we would be getting more sleep, we would be more rested, we would be more engaged as a family. And we would be able to deal with those other issues like the school system and helping the child learn in their environment. So I hope this is, again, one of my special topics, but I think it's really important. If a parent comes to me and says, you know, he's 5 years old, he's doing great on his academics, he's going to start school next year and he already knows how to read. Isn't that fantastic? Yeah, it's really great, but you can't go to the grocery store. You can't take him swimming. He isn't toilet trained. You're worried about his diet, and he's totally fixated on the iPad all the time. You know, when you've got the money for the more intensive therapy before age 6, those are the sort of functional things you need to be looking at. But for families, we're thinking, can he talk? Can he read? These are so important. They are really important. But it's easier to teach a child to talk out of the basement when he's engaged in things that are fun than it is just on the therapy table, right? So anyway, that's my, you know, one of my special topics. You've mentioned the importance of of special education assistants, but in a lot of situations we find our educational assistant was using a one-size-fits-all and, quite frankly, being one-dimensional. So we've decided to let him be used for another child who needs it rather than ours, is that a bad decision? It's not a bad decision. I mean, quite often if a child is learning in their environment, some of our kids are academically quite able, and to give them a one-to-one assistant all the time, it's just, it's unnecessary. But you may want to be thinking about where are his deficits? Like, is it the social interaction? What we should be asking for is a special education assistant or a program or more support here to work with his peers. So if you've given up an educational assistant, it probably means he didn't need it that much, right? But he might need other things much more that you're not seeing yet because you don't have the, you haven't seen enough of these situations to understand it's the social interaction. At ACT, we spent a lot of time trying to educate families about the importance of social interaction and not just focusing on the academics. Because if you think about it, the people that you work with and you deal with from day to day, it's not necessarily the smartest people in the room that you want to be around, right? It's not the academically able people who are necessarily the most productive or the most fun, right? It's not going to, what we need in this life is we need a couple of good friends, family, people who will look out for us. And if we can teach our young people with autism about social engagement and the importance of it, that's really great. I mean, it's very nice now that for a while there, the speech-language pathologist was teaching Adam to identify people's characteristics. Well, the day my father took him to the library, and he turned to his grandfather and he said, "The librarian," yes, he said, that's the library. He says, "She has an enormous stomach." That was the week I said, maybe we will not be describing people, because he's getting really good at it, He'd say things like, "Grandfather, you have no hair. I've got lots of hair." He doesn't say it anymore because he's kind of losing his hair prematurely, like his grandfather did. And so Adam is not making comments about people's hair anymore. But it's just an indication of the importance of, if you want to make friends and influence people, it's learning those things like not making personal remarks about, is that kind behavior. So I just think that a lot of time we are focusing so much on the academics that we're not realizing that the social interaction is so important, and it's a huge component of the deficits that our children face. If you are socially able, you do not have a diagnosis of autism, or you shouldn't. So that, if you're giving communication, social interaction, those are the sort of two key things that we should be thinking of. I was not invited to the IEP meeting for my son. I only got a copy of the IEP when I requested it. This is actually in contravention of the special education policy, and I think that the parent would be well within their rights to go to the principal and say, this is what happened. I'm not sure if there was some kind of confusion why I wasn't invited to the IEP meeting. How do I make sure that next time I am invited? And by the way, because I didn't see it beforehand, I'm concerned about if this is the case, I'm concerned about some of the aspects of it. When can we hold a meeting that I can be a part of? Okay?